Join me for Reflections in Time. It's often nice to look into the future. What, for example, our University of Omaha is going to be like in 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 years. But I think often to appreciate what's going on even now or what might happen in the future, we need to look into the past. We need to look at the history of people and places and buildings and the relationship of this university to the city and a variety of things. And so a few years ago I started visiting with a variety of our people at the university, some retired, some still in service, and talking about their recollections, or as I call them, reflections in time. And today we're sitting in the old First National Bank building in the law offices of Miss Margaret Fischer, in a historic place really in the Fischer family, but more than that, Margaret's an alumnus of our university. And not only the university, but of the local law college that she and I are going to talk about. I'm so glad she's able to visit with us today and take time from her busy work in legal activity, which she's been at for a long, long time. Margaret, it's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. It's nice to have you down to see me.
Well, you know, Margaret, I think what I'd like to hear about you, many people in the city and at the university have heard many things relating to you and your activities in the community, the university, Dana College, civic activities. But let's go back beyond all that to when Margaret was a little girl and her family. And where all did you and your family start? We sit here in Omaha now. Is that where it all began, in Omaha? And if so, what was it like, and where did it begin?
You want to know about my roots, huh?
Yes.
Well, my father came from Germany in 1886 when he was about 17 years old, and he came to avoid the compulsive draft in Germany because Bismarck was riding high at that time. And it's always kind of interesting to think that in those days, any young man that wanted to escape the draft could very easily leave legitimately and come to America, because of course America had its arms open for especially that type of Europeans.
Oh, yeah.
So my dad went originally to Philadelphia, and then he was a butcher by trade. Then he went to Chicago and didn't like Chicago because it was too big, and so he, the story is now, you know, that we heard as kids that my dad went down to the train station, and of course all he had practically was in a suitcase, so he said to the train master, "When's your next train leave?" And one left in an hour for Omaha, and one left in an hour and a half for St. Louis, so he said, "Well, I'll take the train to Omaha." So he landed in Omaha and started working in a grocery store, and then briefly worked, I think, at the packing house. And my dad had always wanted to study law. He was one of 4 children, the only boy. And of course, you know, the Germans always have believed much in education.
Yes.
So while my dad was working at the grocery store, he became acquainted with some other young men, as I understand, and there were maybe 4 or 5 of them that wanted to study law. And so he got them together and hired a couple of one practicing attorney and one judge, as I understand, and I think they just met, you know, in somebody's office and studied law. Of course, in those days, you could read law, and I guess you still can. If you can read law for a period of 4 years under any lawyer who is admitted to the bar and can pass the bar exam, well, then you can take it.
Yes, I was going to say,
Yeah.
You didn't have to go to
You
a
didn't
school.
have to go to...
Abraham Lincoln and all those men didn't
They never
necessarily
did.
go to law school.
They
did they?
read law.
Yeah.
And my father happened to be in the very first class that had to take the bar exam. Before that, the story was that they'd go down to Lincoln, they'd buy the Supreme Court judge a cigar, good cigar, and he'd ask him a few questions, and they would become a lawyer. And the fascinating thing to me, Paul, we turned out some pretty wonderful lawyers in those days.
And they mainly just absorbed it
That's
on their
exactly
own.
right. And they learned it by practical experience, and I often think now, I wonder what young people learn in law school, because when they get out, they don't even know where the courthouse is. So then briefly, my dad passed the bar and came to Omaha and opened an office. And then he became involved about 1912, 1913 with organizing the Omaha Wholesale Produce Market House Company. And
Sort of back to produce and butchering and things like that again.
And he got to know, of course, all the grocers in Omaha and many of the farmers. And the interesting thing is some of the great-grandchildren of my dad's original clients are still clients of mine.
Is that right?
So my dad then would go to the city market, which is now the old market, and it's where the parking lot is for the French Cafe. and the market company owned all that, and the farmers, of course, there were many truck farmers around Omaha. They'd bring their produce in. The grocers, no Safeway, no hinky-dink, they would come down, and they'd meet there at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, buy their produce, and go back to their store, to their gardening, and then my dad would come to the office and practice law. So he was a marvelous man.
Sounded
and
like
very
long
hardworking.
hours.
Yeah. My mother was born in Wahoo, and her parents were Swedish. My mother couldn't even talk English when she started kindergarten, because Wahoo had nothing but Swedes and Bohemians. So my mother came to Omaha the year of the Trans-Mississippi Exposition and went to work as a domestic in a private home. Met my father at the old Kuntz Memorial Church, which was at 16th and Harney at that time.
Oh, it was what is now downtown, really?
Downtown. And then my father was on the board of Kuntz for 40-some years, and he was the one that, he was on the board of deacons, or he was a deacon, when they bought the property at 26th and Farnham, way out on Farnham Street.
That was out of town, wasn't it, practically?
The members all said, it's never going to work. We're going too far out. And now, last Sunday, Dr. DeFries mentioned that we are the downtown church. So anyways, they met and they were buying a little house, and they were married there. And my older brother, Herbert, and my sister Mary, both of whom went to university, were born there. And then folks built this house, again, way out of town at 36th and Lafayette.
Oh, my, yeah.
And it was finished right before I was born, and I've lived in it ever since. And then my younger brother was born there, too.
We didn't tell people, Margaret, I didn't tell them as we began, we're recording this in the summer of 1982 to put it into perspective. So we're talking about lots of years here that have gone. You know, going back to those early days and your memories of not only your family, but the Omaha as you saw it as you were a little girl, what was it like?
Oh, it was wonderful. And
Why do you say that?
I understand that you interviewed Marge Killian, and
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sure Marge and I would weep together for beautiful downtown Omaha.
Yes.
And you know, the big thrill was to get 5-cent car fare and come down to the old library, which was a beautiful old building. And my sister and I, well, we always were great readers, and we'd get these books and go home in the streetcar. And of course, all of 16th Street had beautiful stores. 15th Street had stores, and I
What
remember.
kind of stores did they have? Were there places like Brandeis then?
Oh, yeah, and of course, Nebraska Clothing was at 15th and Farnham, and then there was Quilla Court
Oh, yes, I remember
houses,
that,
and
yes.
then, of course, I even remember the old Burgess Nash. And then every Christmas, well, right, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, why, then all the stores would have a special Christmas display, and then they would give an award, and the mayor would always light the lights, you know, and whatnot.
So they really started Christmas displays after Thanksgiving in those days?
Yeah,
How
so
nice.
for me, and of course the First National Bank, I think was finished in about I forget, my dad moved in that, was one of the first tenants.
In this building?
Yeah, and of course the old Omaha National was the New York Life originally, and then I was glad to see that saved, but it's heartbreaking, truly, but of course it isn't only Omaha, it's every place.
No. And as you think of those days when the downtown area was such a vital part of life and all the shopping was here, what sorts of things did you do for entertainment in those days? We didn't have television.
We went to the old Boyd Theater,
Yeah.
which was at 17th and Harney, where the power company is, because our family always had liked, you know, theatrical things, and so my dad and mother would take us. We went to the old Brandeis Theater, which had the Clement Walsh players, and we went to the matinee, my mother and sister and I. We went to a lot of movies.
Lots of live entertainment, though, too,
Oh,
wasn't
yes, yeah. And we started going to the Playhouse when it first started, and that's some 50 years ago, I guess. And we read a lot, and we used to go out and play. We didn't sit in front of
Go
buildings.
out and play.
And Run, Sheep, Run, and Last Man Out, and Statue, and all those things.
Yeah, I know.
In other words, it wasn't organized. We were out the other night to see my little great-nephew play Little League ball, and they have hard helmets, and they have beautiful uniforms with numbers on their back. And my brother Howard said it's a far cry from the Beavis Park Rinky Dinks. They didn't have any bases. They would, you know, just put out something for a base, and whoever had the ball and whoever had the bat got to play, whether they could play or not. So I really, you feel kind of sad that life has become so structured for kids nowadays. You know, there are too many swimming meets and baseball and
It seemed more
soccer.
free and open, did it?
Oh, yes. I mean, we weren't afraid of anything. We could, even as if we'd go out and walk at night. And
Well,
stuff.
Omaha was a fairly small city, wasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose our population was maybe 150,000, but yeah, I'm sure it was small. And then, of course, when things started moving out, and of course the area around the old university at 24th and Pratt was one of the finest residential areas in Omaha. Because you see, it was close to Coons Park, and we used to have our May Day activities there, and crown the May Queen, and
What we came to call Mai Day later on?
May Day, yeah. And we'd dress up and do little dances and have the maypole, and of course it was a big honor to be the queen. And so they had quite a number of their activities in Old Coons Park, which was very lovely then.
Before we moved to the university and the law college and things like that, I wanted to ask you, too, about your remembrance and your impressions of the schools that you went to as a little girl. What were they like?
Oh, I went to Franklin School. We all went to Franklin School, all four of us.
That was close to home.
Yeah, it was a neighborhood school. And my very best friend, all through Franklin and all through Central, is still one of my very best friends. And she came to my anniversary celebration 3 years ago when I was honored by the bank and by the court. And we had a wonderful school, and I had the best teacher, one of the best teachers. I had a couple at the university that I would consider great teachers, but my 8th grade teacher was one of the very most wonderful teachers I ever had.
Why do you remember her as being so great? Do you have anything specific?
She was very strict, but very loving and very, she made you learn. And I remember when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, I went to the very first accelerated summer school. In other words,
Accelerated summer school?
Yeah, and we were given all this battery of...
Well, summer school itself was kind of new, wasn't it?
Very new. This was the first year they had it, and they chose some kids that were academically all right, I guess, and they concentrated on intelligence tests and aptitude tests and all the things, you know, that I think it was experimental, and we were kind of the guinea pigs. I don't remember. But anyways, Franklin School was a dear, wonderful school, and it's torn down now, which is heartbreaking. And one of the nice things, this favorite teacher of mine, Edith Isaacson, later came to me professionally. And it was one of the biggest thrills of my life. And I'm sure that she was happy to see someone that she started out, turned out pretty good. So
yeah.
That was real nice.
You know, the city, as you described, you mentioned riding the streetcar, and that was commonplace. I often think that young children who haven't had a chance to ride a streetcar really miss something, and a nice train.
A nice train, and we used to have that. There used to be an open streetcar, and our church would always have their Sunday school picnic over at Mandan Park, and they'd rent the, you know, chart of the streetcar, and the preacher. I remember our young preacher would run along, you know, and jump up on the step. Of course, naturally, everybody's childhood seems great, I suppose, and probably the children nowadays are building up memories that they'll talk about 50 years from now.
But they are different, aren't they? Because of the, for one thing, the structure that you emphasize, I think, is such a part of our culture today.
Oh, there's no question about it. You know, life was simpler and
a little slower, wasn't it?
Much slower, and we weren't cluttered with so many, you know, things that. And then after Franklin, then we all went to Central, which of course was a great, great school, and still is a great school. And should I keep it?
Yeah, we've got a little time left. That's fine.
And so we had our Central High 50th reunion back in 74. And some of the people in our class had not been back to Omaha for 50 years.
Oh,
so
wow.
That was
a great get-together.
Yeah, it really was. It was a great, great. We hadn't had any in 50 years, so it was a great success.
We've been visiting for the past 15 minutes or so with Margaret Fischer, an alumnus of our University of Nebraska at Omaha, or more specifically, the University of Omaha. And we've been talking about early days in Omaha on the tape so far, if you've watched the first segment. And about the time we wound up with our first segment of tape, Margaret was, well, I guess we were over at Central High School. And you indicated you really liked it and thought it was a fine school.
Oh, Central High was the school. You see, at that time, there was Central, Tech, South. That was it.
That was it.
And if you wanted to go on to college, then you went to Central High. And then after...
It was really the college prep place,
Oh, no question about it. And, you know, they really... Anybody that you know, was interested in scholar. Well, and I shouldn't say that because tech was good, but tech was more geared to, you know, the industrial arts. And
Right.
South High, of course, was in a different area of town. And then while I was there, they did build North High, and then that started. And then, of course, now there's so many. Although the wonderful thing for us old Central alums is that it's still a marvelous school, and academically. But of course now they've got, you know, some competition.
Oh, yeah.
But and I was at Central when they lowered Dodge Street, and
yeah, that's right. It was to be higher, wasn't it?
yeah, it was a tremendous bank, and they used to have a cable car. I don't remember the cable car.
There
but
really
they
was
done-
quite a hill there, wasn't
Oh yeah, and then you see St. Mary's or St. Margaret Mary's and Trinity and all those. Then got another extra floor, and of course then Central got the, you know, beautiful sloping things, and so then after my freshman year at Central, I went to Boyles College because of course in those days they didn't teach type and shorthand at Central, and because it was geared more to the college prep. And I studied shorthand and type, so then I started working in my dad's office after school
Oh, you
when I was
were
a sophomore.
in
yeah.
his office,
Yeah.
basically, back in
And
the
of
old
course
days.
that was the biggest break because all the time, all those years, I got to know everybody, and they kind of got to know me. And I, you know, from a practical standpoint, I learned the mechanics of the practice of law, which is very important.
Let me insert a question here. I was going to ask you later, and it almost came up now in line with what you said. Did you always want to go into law, or was there ever a time when you wanted to do something else?
Not really.
It was just family, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was
You
kind of
grew
family.
up in and around it.
And I always said I was going to be a lawyer, and of course my family fortunately didn't discourage me, and fortunately I apparently landed in the right profession because I've loved it all
Yeah.
these years. And so then of course I graduated, and there were my older brother and sister, and of course they were both out at the old University of Omaha.
24th and Pratt.
24th and Pratt. And then, of course, I went there. In those days, there wasn't any question about it because it was hard times and with 4 kids to educate. And as I remember, and I'm sure the records would show, I think it maybe cost my dad a couple $100 a year for each one of us. Of course, there was just the tuition and books. There wasn't the...
And the car fare.
and the car fare, that's right. And we'd take the streetcar to 24th and Cummings and then transfer and go out to 24th and Pratt.
Didn't have any parking problems.
None at all.
Everybody came by streetcar?
Everybody, well, I do remember the transition when some of the more lucky ones did have cars, and occasionally, toward the end, my dad would let my brother take our old Jordan car.
Ah,
and
Jordan.
Yeah.
Now, when you first think of the first recollection you have of that campus, what was it like? What did it look like? And,
it was sad,
yeah?
I guess. You know, there was the so-called gymnasium, Jacobs Hall.
Yeah.
Of course, I did not go during the day when it was still in that beautiful old home that was torn down.
That was torn down by
Yeah.
the time you came?
Oh, yeah. There were just the 2 buildings. The one, forget what the name of it is, and that was where all the classes were. And then the gymnasium or chapel or, you know, where everything went on, the dances. And did we dance in those days? I don't remember because it was a Presbyterian school. And I vaguely remember Dr. Jenkins. But I think I don't remember what year he died.
What are your impressions of him? What do you see when you mention him?
Well, kind of kind of an awe-inspiring man, you know. We stood in awe of him because he was president of the university.
Yeah.
And then, who came after that? While I was there was a doctor.
Seelak?
No, Seelak came after. Wiskowski or something.
I thought
like.
Emery's dad was in there for a little while.
Yeah,
Don Emery's dad was
yeah.
there for a little while.
And then there was kind of a lively little man, but he only lasted a couple of years. And then while I was there,
Well, this all happened while you were there.
yeah, they bought the old release from the school board. I don't know which. The old Saratoga school that was at 24th and Ames.
Yeah, over by the car barns there,
Yeah,
right?
right
Where
across from the
streetcars.
car barns, and it's now, I believe, a parking lot. Or it was a grocery store for a while. And that's where they had the chemistry and physics. And,
all the lab
yeah.
courses.
And why we ever didn't blow the whole town up, I'll never know. because we were working with chemicals in the chem lab, and that building was just a fire trap. But, you know, we didn't think anything about it.
Now, when you were on that part of the campus, how do you go? Did you go back and forth? Did you walk?
You bet.
That was a good part of maybe a mile?
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes we would have to, well, usually they try and schedule it so you go up once a day. And so it, and that is where I had Nell Ward, who was one of the great teachers in my life.
I was fortunate to get to know her later in her life.
You didn't get to interview her?
No, I didn't.
Oh, my, she was the most wonderful teacher. And, of course, Nell Ward taught all of the courses for the pre-med students. And most of the pre-med students then would go on to University of Nebraska Medical School. And I understood that Nell Ward's students were considered better prepared for medical school than from almost any other school.
The faculty, though, Jenna, and the student body were small, weren't they?
They're small, but we had some wonderful, wonderful teachers.
Do you remember some of the rest of them?
Yeah, and then, of course, the other great teacher in my life was a Dr. Vartanian, who later changed his name to Dr. Rosemont. And, of course, you had to take Bible. You had to take some religious course.
It was still a religious school.
Yeah, it was Presbyterian. And he was just really wonderful. You know, you still remember some of the things that he said. And then there was a Fanny Gould who taught English, and she was a kind of a funny little plump lady, and really wasn't what you would consider you know, a good teacher from the standpoint of lecturing there. But she made you want to read. She'd get you so curious about these things that she'd talk about.
Made you hungry for reading.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, Dean James was a marvelous teacher, and I took Browning from him, and again, they stimulated your mind. Of course, the classes were small.
I was going to say very small.
And we had some poor teachers, of course, but fortunately, you forget them. And then, of course, the big social place of the school was the coffee house, about which I'm sure you've heard, which was right across the street from the university, and it was privately owned.
Yeah, it didn't belong to the university, did it?
Mrs. Mack. No, Mrs. Mack ran it, and of course, everybody would, not everybody, but your gang would go over there, you know, in the morning, and you'd have coffee, and if you were real rich, you'd go over and have lunch. But most of us brought our lunch, and we didn't have a lunchroom, but they gave us a room in the basement, I guess, where we...
So they didn't serve meals to the students on campus?
No, heavens, no, I should say not. And, of course, we had to go to chapel, and we sang all the good old brighten up the corner where you are, and when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there, and bringing in the sheaves and whatnot. And we went to chapel every day.
That was required.
It was required, and we loved it.
Was it a little service with Jenkins or someone giving a little sermonette?
Yeah, and sometimes they'd have the students give it. It was, I remember, it was about a half an hour. And you scheduled your classes. Sometimes you'd only go, you know, you'd only have a couple classes. And I didn't study much out there. They did have a library of sorts that was, you know, where you could go and study. But because then I would come to the office, and of course I would study down here. And then
so you were tied between the office and school?
And then, of course, I started night law school my sophomore year at the university.
So now you were going to really two schools at one time?
Yeah, the reason I didn't start my freshman year, which I had really planned on doing, was because the American Legion was having their national convention in Omaha in October of 1925, or 4 and 5. And my father was afraid that there'd be too many wild legionnaires downtown, and he didn't want me coming home in the streetcar at 9 o'clock at night, you know.
So the Legion put you off for a year?
For a year, yeah. So I started then in I became a lawyer in 29, so it would have been 25.
One thing I was going to ask you is you were discussing some of the things on the campus out there. Do you recall, along with what you were doing, and of course going to law school as you began as a sophomore, some of the programs that young people, what sorts of things did they seem to major in when they went out to the University of Omaha in those days, or the college?
There were a lot of pre-med students. And there wasn't such a thing, I suppose, that we considered pre-law, but you took logic and you took speech from Dr. James. And of course, there were a lot of girls going into teaching, because that was about the only profession for women in those days.
Nobody but you, though, going into law, huh?
Well, nobody. No, yeah. And again, I can say that the friendships that we formed, I still keep in very close touch with 2 of the girls that I graduated with, and several of them are clients of mine. And we've never really made the effort to get together and have a class reunion, which is too bad because now our 50th is past and we probably never will. But we were all very involved, and I was trying to think of it the other day, because we were very serious. And of course, in those days, you know, the racial situation was, you know, there was terrible racial feeling, racial prejudice, and everybody just took for granted that that's the way it was and always should be. So a group of us got very much interested, and we had a couple of lovely black students in our class, and we used to we'd sit and try and solve the problems of the world. Then we were all very, very interested in, and Paul, I can't think of the name. I was trying to think of the other day. I even went to a national convention, and this was going to save the world through the young people and religion. And they had a national convention in Detroit, and several of us from the university went. And it was geared sort of like home missionary, I guess. I don't know.
Well, you know, that's interesting. These things you're telling me now, I would think that students back in those days, in the 20s, were very book-oriented and not too interested in social or religious problems. You're saying that wasn't so at all.
Oh, we were just as crazy as kids nowadays. And just the girls were just as interested in getting dates, and the boys, I think we were all a little shyer, perhaps, than and there were several fraternities and sororities on the campus. I didn't belong.
Also, they'd already begun that.
Oh yeah, they were, of course,
activity.
They were local, and of course, they all eventually became national after the merger. And my older brother was active in his fraternity, so I remember when we were desperate for men, why we would tell Herb he'd have to come up with 2 or 3 guys for our parties.
Now, what sort of social life was there for students that the university might have provided?
Not much.
Have a dance now and then, anything like that?
You know,
parties?
I'm sure that but there were a lot of private. You know, I remember when we graduated, why Annunciata Garotto, and I would suggest she'd be a very interesting resource for you.
Good.
And she went on into Grand Opera, and Nuncie's father had an Italian. He sold Italian macaroni and that sort of thing, and they had a party for us at their home, and we had the most wonderful Italian food. So we had a lot of, and then we had you know, isn't that funny? We did have a football team if they could get, how many is it, 11 guys?
Takes 11 usually,
yeah. And they had a terrible time getting 11 guys. I don't know that they had baseball. Basketball was their big, big deal.
That was it. That was the biggie.
And that was where they played that in the so-called chapel, or
yes,
you know.
And that small gymnasium.
Yeah.
Don Flaster talked about that. The opponent didn't think it was very big, I guess.
That's oh no, and I think probably the tallest fellow in the team was maybe 6 feet, and he was considered tall. And then they had like Mai Day, and the women had some. But I was never involved in the women's athletic. And there's another person I'll tell you about that would be interesting to visit with. And because, see, all these people were my contemporaries, and they would be able to remember things.
Yes,
that
I'm glad you're giving me these names.
And we had some wonderful friendships. We really did.
We've got to pause again. We're running out of tape, and we'll pick it up with the wonderful friendships and a little more at the university, as it was on North 24th. Last tape ended was describing to us in the days when she was younger about what they did in the way of social activity at the University of Omaha. And as you described, there weren't much, but you had some parties, often off campus. You had a few things, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose our social life was a chapel, huh? Oh, yeah, you know, and of course they did have put on plays and that sort of thing.
Yes.
I don't know, but and of course it was the enrollment. I think maybe there were a couple hundred. So you see, we had
very small.
Our social life was our friends, and
now you graduated in 1928, didn't you?
I graduated in 28, got my Bachelor of Arts degree.
How big was your class? Any remembrance?
There were about 20 of us in the class. And that was when this Dr. Wig something or other, and I remember he had a beautiful party for us.
Who was your president?
It was the president of the university, and he was there he was a little controversial, and he was there so I remember only a couple of years. And he had a beautiful party at his home, I remember. And so we had quite a bit of activities. We had and we had the graduation. I think it was outdoors, outside the chapel.
Was it in the park up there? Or what?
No, I think it was right outside the so-called chapel, as I remember it. And that's when all these people that I still are good friends with, we were all in the same class.
No.
And the Ma'i Day was a big deal, as I remember they even had a parade with balloons.
Do you remember how that all got started? Why did we have this parade in May? It was
Well,
just historic, but when did it really get rolling? What?
It started long before I had it. It was in the days of Mildred, as I remember the story of Mildred, who later became Mrs. Chester Lynn, Mildred Lynn, whom I used to take to alumni things, and I think she was the first Ma'i Day princess.
Is that right?
But now Olga Strimble could tell you a great deal about that.
And we'll ask her about that.
Now,
because
she would know all
it's an
about
interesting history to that and how it really got started. Now, it must have seemed in 1928 or so that you had a lot of time on your hands. You were only going to go to one school then. You were done with college.
But
and
then I was working full-time at my dad's office.
So you were really full-time over here.
Yeah, that's right.
And a year later?
And a year later, then I got my Bachelor of Law degree. And in our law class, there were about, well, I think we probably graduated about 12. And you see, all of the students there were people that worked during the day and would go to law school at night. And, of course, would never been able to have a legal education if it hadn't been for the night law school. And there again, I remained friends with several of the fellows that graduated with me.
Didn't you feel at times in those late 20s and early 30s as you really moved in as a lawyer, like you were sort of alone? Because there weren't very many women in the profession. Didn't people kind of look twice at you?
Well,
What's she doing in that kind of work?
No, I was just kind of accepted all along. I don't remember, and I can remember I passed the bar exam and down in Lincoln in June 20th, 1929, and in those days the bar exam was all in writing. There wasn't any, I don't know, I think there's part oral now. And it took us a day, maybe a day and a half. And of course we were examined on everything that we had studied in law school, all criminal law, civil law, and all the phases of it. And of course we had all studied. I don't think I was ever smarter in my whole life than the night before I took the bar exam. And
really prepped for it.
You bet. And so they would grade, the committee would grade the papers as we went along.
Oh.
So by the time we finished, within hours, we knew whether we were...
That was nice. You didn't have to wait for weeks to find out.
And then we all stayed over and were sworn in the next morning in front of the Supreme Court. And I remember calling home, of course, to tell them, which was in those days, calling long distance was a great luxury, and to tell them that I'd passed and would be home the next day. And I was riding with Mr. Cockle, who owned the Cockle Printing Company, and his wife had ridden down with us. She was studying law just mostly for the fun of it, and she asked us questions all the way down to Lincoln, I remember. And then we stopped to visit some relatives of theirs, in a small town on the way home. So I didn't get home till late afternoon. Well, the next morning when I came to the office, and my dad was then on 14 in this building, he had my name on the door.
He was all ready for you.
He was ready for me. And of course, I more or less the first maybe year or so, I continued to do his stenographic work, and their law business wasn't all that big in those days. But my very first client.
I was going to ask you who your first client was.
My very first client was Dr. Kuhn, who taught German out at the university, and he had some rental property, and the people owed, I don't know, month's rent, maybe $20, something like that. And so he came to me, and I filed suit, and I was, you would have thought that I was appearing before the Supreme Tribunal. I was so nervous the night before, and my brother, Herb, who was older and had been a lawyer 2-3 years, said, "Oh, don't worry, he won't show up, and the judge will give you, the judgment, and that'll be it." So I went up to Muni Court, and we had one of the most difficult of the municipal judges. He was a little bit testy, and I don't think he was too impressed with me. And because I was quite young, because by going day and night, I was just 21 when I became a lawyer.
Oh, my word, that is unusual.
And so the clerk called the case, and the defendant came walking forward.
Yeah.
And I nearly fell, I nearly fainted, and I wished the world would open up and swallow me. And so he walked up to the bench, and the judge said to him, "Are you so-and-so, and do you owe this bill?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "I got the money here." And the only time in my whole life, Paul, when anybody has come to court with the money to pay the judgment wasn't entered.
I have it here in cash.
I have it here in cash. So, and then, of course, we always did a lot of real estate and estates, which is, of course, the nicest part of the law business. And my dad, naturally, because he'd been in practice so many years, and he always had a lot of farmer with these wonderful farmer clients, and a lot of the truck farmers and that sort of thing. And so every farmer had 12 kids. And of course, in those days, we didn't have Xerox, so you'd have to carbon all the reports and stuff. And I would sit, I remember, and type reports, because my dad would put down every penny that came in, every penny that went out.
Lots of carbon copies.
Yeah, lots of carbon copies. So anyways, the university at that time, the night law school was held at 13th and Farnham Street on the third floor. And we had also, at that time, judges and lawyers as our teachers, some marvelous
Most of the
teachers.
faculty was made up of practicing
They all
lawyers
were.
and judges.
They all were. And there again, I had a couple of great teachers. Dave Swore, who taught us real estate, was simply marvelous. And so I felt that we got a very wonderful education and very practical. See, many of the fellows that were going there would have other jobs, and they were doing this to increase.
Well, as you did when you were in school, you were doing 2 or 3 things at one time.
And of course it was adult education was what it amounted to.
But in that period we're talking about, the Depression is coming on and so on, and things were tough, weren't they?
If you could get a job for $7 a week, you were lucky.
Yeah. And everything was small and cheap, but hardly...
It was cheap, but you didn't have the money to pay for it.
You didn't have the money to pay for it. But in that period we're talking into now, shortly after you graduated and became a practicing lawyer, that was the period when the decision was finally made, wasn't it? Or there was attempts being made to, or there were attempts being made to have the city take over the university.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything of that period and what went on in that period?
Well, I do, because I was, of course, terribly interested, and we had a young girl working for us at the time, part-time, and she was a student out at the university, and she was very involved in the campaign, and my brother Howard was a student out there at that time, and they went around, you know, and door to door and got people to vote for it.
They had a lot of student involvement in it.
Yeah, because as I understand, the university as a private institution was done for. You know, they had no endowment, and they just couldn't handle it.
Was the enrollment about the same or going down a little during that Depression period?
Paul, I really don't. But actually, the university would have been out of existence if it hadn't been taken over, and I think it was a very wonderful solution. And in my book, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but in my book, the glory days of the university was when it was municipal, when it was smaller and the faculty was intimate and knew each other. And
you're talking about the 30s and early 40s, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, and even up until the time when the merger took place with the state, because I was on the Board of Regents at that time, and it was heartbreaking that we had to do it because we lost our family feeling. And in those days, you see, everybody, as you know, the faculty all knew each other. And
it was a very cozy place.
It really was.
But again, financially, it was a problem for the future.
We were told by Terry Carpenter that if we didn't make the move, why the legislature would make the move, and we certainly didn't want to deprive Omaha of our great school.
You know, that first big move, though, the vote to make it municipal, Bill Thompson, whom you knew so well, and was a wonderful man, he visited with me in these reflections before he died, and he talked about one of the reasons that the vote went our way was because of all the work the students had done, but also there was a big rain the night before, and it was so muddy. A lot of the people that he thought were going to vote against it didn't.
That's cute. I'd never heard that. I don't have any idea, Paul, what the vote was. Do you know?
I don't know how close it was. Maybe from someone we can find out,
Yeah,
but I have no
interesting.
indication of really how resoundingly the people of Omaha said yes or no, but they did, and we became Gave us new life, really.
It gave us new life, and then the big question was where to move.
Yeah.
And they moved way out on 60-something in Dodge Street.
Now, I bet that caused some consternation. Why are you moving it out there, I suppose, was said, and things like that.
Yeah, of course, a lot of people want to keep it in the North Omaha.
Sure.
Some wanted to move way down to South Omaha. And I, of course, wasn't involved so much. I would go to alumni meetings a little bit. But for a period there, I wasn't too involved with the university.
Those were your young days in the legal profession.
Oh,
You
yeah.
were very busy, I imagine, among other
well,
things.
not so much busy, but you know how your interests change. And I was getting very active in civic things at that time, Chamber of Commerce and that sort of thing, and Urban League, and so.
In those early days that you went to the university, and before you graduated, what sort of a reputation did our university have as a school? Was it well accepted? Did people compare it to Creighton or the University of Nebraska? What were people saying about the school?
We didn't care. We didn't pay much attention. I'm sure that all my rich friends that graduated me from Central, you know, sort of looked down upon us, but we didn't. You know, you were young and you didn't think anything about it. I don't remember. Of course, Creighton wasn't all that great either at that time, you know. And I've always felt, and I will defend to the hilt, the education that all of us received at the old university in the academic part and at law school with anybody else's education. I really will, because we had a really, I often marvel at the great teachers that we had that stayed there. And because I'm sure they weren't paid very much.
No, no.
But of course, I think it was and of course there wasn't, you know, all the facilities for research and writing papers and that, but it's really interesting. Of course, it was the Times and all, you know.
Yeah, but we didn't necessarily equate size with goodness, did we?
No, not at all.
Small was pretty good often.
It sure was. And even the University of Nebraska-Lincoln wasn't all that big.
So.
And I remember, it seemed to me once we had a winning basketball team, and that was real good.
When the campus did move, do you remember Dodge Street and what things looked like out there? It was mainly just the building wasn't there.
And it was the first air-conditioned university in the country.
That was really innovative,
and of course, at that
wasn't it?
time, Dr. Haynes was president. And I can so well remember that, and I forget if I was on the alumni board, but anyways, a group of us were invited out there, either shortly after the building was finished or before, and Mr. Latenzer, a dear, wonderful John Latenzer, whom I got to know very well when I was on the Board of Regents. And he walked us around, and oh my,
he was so... Wasn't that a sparkling new air-conditioned building?
Oh, it was beautiful, just beautiful.
We need to pause again, Margaret. We've run out of tape, and we have another segment. We'll pick it up with that beautiful new building out at the new site when we come back in segment 4 of our Reflection in Time with Margaret Fischer. Well, we're beginning our 4th segment of visiting and reflections in time in the summer of 1982 with our friend Margaret Fischer, who graduated from our university in 1928. But we moved beyond that now, and Margaret has taken us just in the last moments as we ended that 3rd tape through this shiny, new, beautiful, built by government money, new building.
On how many acres?
Yeah, on 52 acres.
Well, all of us, I'm sure that, again, hindsight, it's just tragic that the university didn't buy all the acres to the west, because, you see, there weren't any houses on it, hardly at all, and of course, Fair Acres was there, but it was, you know, farther back. And
do you have any idea, legally or for any other reasons, why we just didn't
I suppose they didn't have the money. See, I was not really involved with any phase of the university except the Alumni Association, so I don't have any idea. I know there was a lot of controversy in the board, and you see, the board of the municipal university was appointed by the school board.
That's right.
And I remember they were on the front pages of the paper. There were a lot of problems. Then when I was nominated for the Board of Regents, Dr. Was it Seelock that was there? Before
Dr.
Kirk,
Bale?
Before Dr. Naylor.
Before Dr. Naylor.
Before Dr.
There was Dr. Trawick.
Trawick, yeah. See, I was on when Dr. Trawick was, and I was involved in his inauguration, and I never was, I think one of the nicest things that ever happened to me was when I was chosen by the school board to be on the board of the Municipal University of Omaha. It was a very, very enriching experience.
You started to get a different look at the university,
oh,
didn't
yes.
you then?
Oh, yes. And we were there during all the, you know, the building after building, and never went to a Board of Regents meeting that they weren't digging up the campus someplace. And of course, very, very soon, the aesthetics of it were totally spoiled, and now I think it's an atrocity. The way they've got buildings stuck this way and that way, and the lovely, lovely old administration building, which still architecturally I think is beautiful. You know, it's lost.
Yes, that often happens when we build
yeah.
it. Things sort of get to be a hodgepodge, don't they?
Unless you have enough space.
Yeah.
And that's where, you mentioned I was on the board up and down, and that's where they're very fortunate, because you see they have plenty of space, and they can put their buildings artistically.
As you think of the university as you've known it over these many, many years, since the 20s and on through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, now into the 80s, what are the things as you look at it as a regent, as an alumnus, as a person who lives here in Omaha? What are some of the major things that you feel have changed a lot? You mentioned physically it became sort of a hodgepodge. Other things that you've noticed about your university?
Well, I do think that what the university has done in the field of adult education is absolutely thrilling. I knew Dr., the one that's back east now, that started the adult education department. What was his name?
Dean Emery did so much with it.
Yes.
He passed away just a year or two ago.
Well, there was somebody else.
Dean Hosman before him.
And you know, they started having all these wonderful night classes.
That was quite innovative, too, wasn't it?
It was very innovative, and I think another great thing that the university did is the GI, the military, bootstrap program. That was truly a wonderful, wonderful idea. And because our university was one of the very first that started it, you see, well, you know, some of the distinguished alumni that we have through the military. And it was always such a thrill, because when I was on the board, of course, we'd always be on the platform on graduation day and commencement. And when they would introduce the ones who were getting the degree, and I forget what the degree they called it, but to see all of them stand up, it was marvelous.
Who are some of the people that you remember that stood out in your life and memory that relate to the university? You've mentioned presidents and so on, and Del Ward. There are others over the years, perhaps, that you remember, students and faculty that have meant something to you. Well,
of course, your friends always mean a great deal, and I cannot certainly but give great praise to Dr. Naylor, because I was there during the troubled times, and you know, and Dr. Naylor took over and really,
that period shortly after the merger, really.
Yeah, again saved. Of course, Dr. Bale. See, I did not know I had my only connection with the university after it moved out on Dodge Street was through the alumni and going out to different things and whatnot. So but I got to know Dr. Bale, and of course he was marvelous.
Another dynamo.
You bet he was.
Yeah.
And it still is, as far as that goes. I see him occasionally at civic things. And, well, you know, well, the way I feel about the university, Paul, is if there hadn't been the University of Omaha when we were young, our family wouldn't have been able to have a college education. And I think that is so true today, that so many, many young people in Omaha would never be able to get a college education if it weren't for UNO. And you know, I really feel that they really are fulfilling the dream that Dr. Jenkins had when he started the university.
Yeah, through all this process of change from a private school to municipal,
to a state,
the main value to the city has remained as a local university, not too expensive and helpful to all.
Well, and as a cultural resource too, as far as that goes. And
now, one thing I want
to... really, you want to think, I just peeked into the new library, but when you compare that library with what we had in one little room out at 24th and Pratt.
Your whole campus could
fit in that building. But you wonder if the kids are any smarter than we were.
That's interesting, you know.
Or whether they were any better. I'm sure they weren't any better motivated. But
they have more things they can work with, don't they?
My.
Like the cameras that are recording us today and that sort of thing.
When they opened the new, one of the new buildings, they took the board well, see, then subsequently, lately, I have been on the Chancellor's Advisory Committee, so I've still had this lovely connection with the university, and we were taken through the new athletic thing.
Oh,
My
yes.
goodness gracious.
Health, physical education, and recreation.
Oh, is that something?
Marvelous plant.
And so actually, as far as plant is concerned, I don't see how any university could have things any better than we have out at UNO. I really don't.
Let's make some quick observations on a few things here as we wind up this last segment together. Margaret, you've lived a lot of life, and you've been a professional person all your life, pretty much.
Right.
Is there anything else you ever wanted to be other than a lawyer?
I very briefly, and this is a deep, dark secret, I very briefly wanted to go into church work because I was so under the influence of this Dr. Vartanian and this organization that I can't think of it. Dr. Vartanian thought he could get me a scholarship to the that wonderful Bible school in New York City, and but that didn't last very long.
So
I really, no, I can honestly say this, that if everyone in the world were as lucky as I to be able to spend their life doing what they enjoy doing as much as I do, they'd be awfully lucky.
Dr. Bale once told me, when you get up in the morning and hate to go to the office, it's time to change jobs.
You bet it is, and I can honestly say that I really never have. And of course, my practice now is so beautiful because it's people-oriented, and I'm an old-fashioned lawyer, and would never want to be other than completely on my own. In other words, you know, being in with a firm of 120 lawyers would just absolutely overwhelm me.
Are there certain areas of the law that you found most rewarding and interesting? Certain areas that you like to work with?
Well, I work completely now with estates and wills and real estate. For many, many years, I handled domestic relations. I was the one-woman legal aid society before we had legal aid. Yeah, these poor women had come to me, and finally, about 15 years ago, I decided I didn't have to handle every divorce case that walked in, and you get awful tired of having calls at midnight from some woman whose husband's there beating her up or he didn't send the money, and and of course I love little kids, and it was heartbreaking. So I don't do any of that. Never did do criminal law. Never did do much personal injury, that type of thing. So in law, just like in any profession, like with teaching, you know, you get into what you like to do.
If someone sits down in our beautiful new library that you just described a moment ago, or at the Alumni Association in years to come, and they're a young person, and they haven't really gotten started yet, they're in high school, or they're thinking about they're thinking about an education, is there any advice that you would, from your long years of experience, like to share with people that are going to try to decide what they want to do and then do it?
No, I really don't know, because I do feel that now young people have many more. I think there were aptitude tests, as I remember, but I don't remember they were used.
Like that summer you went to summer school.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't remember if they were career aptitude tests or not, but gosh, the kids have such opportunities now and I think these marvelous scholarships, overseas scholarships, and you know, to me, if I were a young person now, I think the problem would be there's so many fields open to you.
So many chances, it's hard to decide.
It is hard to decide, that's right. But I do feel that if you start out, for instance, to become a teacher and find out you don't like it, you better get out of it. You better get into something else.
Goes back to what you were saying earlier about you better like what you're doing.
You bet, absolutely.
And you've loved it all your life.
I really have, I can honestly say that.
But you've maintained a lot of civic and other collegiate activities. You've related to our university and Dana.
Well, I've been very active up at Kuntz Memorial Church, too. I was the first, I've been the first so many things, Paul, that I was the first woman deacon, and I can remember when our dear Dr. DeFries came to Omaha, and I was on, the woman on board. Dr. Traub didn't mind women on, he thought it was kind of a neat idea, and I was nominated from the congregation and was elected sort of as a rebellion, you'd say, against these stuffy old men. And, of course, and Dr. DeFries was a little bit horrified when he came to Omaha and found that one of his deacons was a woman. And, of course, now we have about 4 or 5 of them on the board, and he always kids me about it. And and then, of course, I live with my family, and my sister has 2 children, and they each have 2 children, so I have had all the blessings of
You've had lots of people
a
around
grandmother.
all your life.
Yeah, that's right. And we've done a lot of traveling, been all over the world.
That's sort of a hobby of yours, moving around?
Yeah. every place but China. I've gotten too old for China.
Well, we've been at it now, Margaret, for about an hour, and I want to thank you so sincerely for myself and for the university for your taking time to be with us on
Thank
this
you, Paul. I
reflection.
really enjoyed it. It's always nice to reminisce and to make people listen to you.
Yeah.
Because generally the young people like these sitting here, I'm afraid they'd get bored, but you see, it's part of their job. So
And they'll get back to watch this tape in years to come. Again,
That's
thanks
right.
so much
When
for
they're old.
Yeah. This has been our Reflections in Time with Margaret Fischer. We thank her and we thank all of you for being with us for another look at our university from Margaret Fischer's perspective.